Okay. There we go.
There, so we see now here the beginning of the Mishna of Sotah on 27b. This is the beginning of the fifth chapter of Sotah, and at this point, it's the Mishnah is now going to discuss how the water checks the woman's fidelity,
Okay.
and how we derive it, and what we are deriving from a portion of the verse. So the verse which is being examined is in Bamidbar chapter 5:22, and we have an expression of uva'u. So we're going to run with it at the moment. So the Mishnah starts, Kishem shahamayim botku esa, just like the water tests her, so kachamayim botkun esa. So also the water will evaluate the potential adulterer also, and how he was involved. Shenema, as the verse says, uva'u uva'u. But in reality, this expression of uva'u is actually repeated, and it is repeated, but first in verse number 24, but then uva'u is repeated a second time, and in the pasuk number 27. And in the context, it says that the water that causes the curse shall enter into her, that is to say, as she drinks it. So ba'u means to enter or to go in. And then in the discussion further of the verses, the verse continues and says, when at another point, as the Torah is discussing, and will be told later on in the Talmud, the gemerah section about it, but when in the repetition of that verse, uba'u, it says it'll come in. Via the Mishnah, we are to understand that because there's a repetition of the words, so in the main context, the first uba'u, we understand that one person gets tested and affected by the water, but as there is a repetition, uba'u, again, we understand that someone else gets affected by it and is tested by it. So hence, we understand that the two parties involved, the him and the suspected adulteress and the suspected adulterer, right, are both evaluated via the capabilities of the waters of the Sotah. The Mishnah continues, and kishem, and then the Mishnah continues and tells us, kishem she'osru labal kach osra laboyel. Now, reading the Mishnah just simply, obviously we don't know it as well as how the translator who's interpolating all the words puts it together, and this is understood via further understandings of the gemerah. Thankfully, the interpolator of the author of the translation has put in some of the understandings for us that we would later derive from the Talmud. but we are told. So furthermore, so that's a kashem she'osa laboil, even though the literal translation of this, just like the husband cannot continue to live with her, so also laboil, the suspected adulterer, can't have any connection to her. Okay, so let's just first understand this before we go to the text verse. So as he explains over here, furthermore, Osra Labal, when she becomes forbidden to her husband. Now, when does she become forbidden to her husband? Well, as soon as the husband has now suspects and is taking formal action on her to test her out, that is post the initial warning that she shouldn't be seen in privacy with this suspected adulterer, and then it does happen again. So then he's now made her and said, well, now I'm taking you for the test of the waters of the Sotah. From that point onwards, and that's why he translates it further, prior to her drinking the water, just as she is forbidden to her husband. So now that she's in that status of being a potential Sotah person, or let us put it this way, she is now being formalized, and the husband says, now I suspect you are now in the status of a Sotah. He is not allowed to have relations with her anymore because she is a suspected adulteress. So also, we have to work this out from our understanding. She is forbidden to her paramour, to her adulterer. Now, what does this mean? She's already married to her husband. So of course she is forbidden to her. Of course she's forbidden to the paramour, right? So what is the Mishna telling me? The Mishna, what and how am I being informed of something different by the Mishna telling me she's forbidden to her paramour? So surely that's obvious, right? So what is the Mishna saying at this point? That she is also, just like he is also to her, also to him, to the husband, she is also to him. Of course she is. So the Mishna must be telling you something that you didn't know. And what is that? That if at this point, when she is forbidden to her husband, that the husband has now classified her and told her she is now the status of a Sotah, and we're now going to start the proceedings of the Sotah proceedings, which is an involved process. You have to go to Jerusalem, and you have to go to the temple. You go to the registration over there, the Kahanim, all these processes, right? So what she says is she has the option of either admitting, or she has the option of saying she doesn't want to go through the waters. And it's potentially that as she is a suspected adulterer, she might be thinking to herself that, well, that's okay. I'll accept the divorce conditions from my husband, but I'll go to this person that I'm suspected of having a relationship with, and he'll take care of me, right? So the verse tells us that at this stage, because she's in the status of a Sotah, and we haven't fully understood, she hasn't been tested out, right? He can divorce her, but she's potentially still in that state of a person that could have been fit to be tested by the Sotah. So there's basically three people in trouble. The original husband, he's just lost his wife, right? The woman, she's got a status of a suspected Sotah, and there's the person that she might have been suspected to have a relationship with. So the verse tells us that she cannot now get married and make a relationship with that suspected person, right? And the verse tells us that that is the case, because in the verse says, right? The verse says, v'nitma. The the verse says that she has become defiled or is defiled. And it also says it says in the one verse, and another verse, and it says in this passage, v'nitma, she has become defiled. And then we see a second mention of the idea of nitma, that she has become defiled. Since she's not going through the status test, right? So she still remains in this potential satyr status, and he, the paramour, is also in that potential status. So since they're both tomer, right, it means that there is a prohibition. There's a prohibition for her, right, and then there's a prohibition for someone else. Well, who's the someone else, right? The original husband has divorced her because she's suspected, but she's never been cleared, and he, the suspected paramour, hasn't been cleared of it as well. So therefore, the second nitma, the second expression of nitma, refers to the paramour, right? So therefore, if she would want to break off the relationship with her husband at this point, accept divorce proceedings, take the file of the divorce and lose her kesubah, she cannot now go and get a proper kedushin, a chuppah of a kedushin. She cannot get married to her suspected paramour, because the verse has said that this one is nitma and this one is nitma. They're both nitma to each other. Okay, so divrei Rabbi Akiva. That's the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. Now, that is the first part of the Mishnah. And the Mishnah will go further and discuss somewhat more ideas. We'll just do a few lines of this, and then we'll look at how the gemerah is understanding it. So Amar Rabbi Yeshua, Kach haya derish Zechariah ben Akotzav. Rabbi Yeshua said this is how Zechariah ben Akotzav would interpret the understanding of the verses of the teachings of Rabbi Akiva. That what did we understand? And this will be brought out from the gemerah, reading the Mishnah as we have just read it, the main text. We wouldn't necessarily understand what the translator is going to tell us, right? But he's adding in this information. Rabbi Zechariah ben Akotzav would interpret and said that he also derived from the superfluous vav that the woman is forbidden to her paramour. Now, this line that we've just said will be elucidated as we go to the gemerah. But essentially, what we've said is, because one verse shares one format, we understand that similar format that's expressed in the other verses follow the same idea, and therefore we can compare them and we can understand and derive that they're really of the same, telling us the same message, that each one that there's a superfluousness in the verses, and therefore this is made that both people are in a state of being osur. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi, continuing the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Rebbe. What? So Rebbe is the name that we refer to as Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi was the head of the Jewish nation at the time of the Mishnah, and he was the editor of the Mishnayos, right? So because he is the teacher of all Israel via the Mishnayos, he is given the name as the Rebbe, right? The teacher, well, the rabbi, the great one, the rabbi, right? But it's really Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi. So that's why he writes it out over here. Rabbi Yehuda Hanossi says, Rabbi Yehuda says, and there's an alternate source, and that is Shnei Pa'amim Ha'omrim B'Parsha, that the two mentions of the Parsha, Nitma v'Nitma, they directly, echad laboil, echad laboil. It refers, whoops, just getting, it refers to the two sources that the defilement of the wife is used in the passage. He warns his wife and she is defiled, which is the ones we had before. And the latter verse, when a wife being under a husband goes astray and is defiled, indicate that her defilement results in two prohibitions. One that is she is forbidden to her husband, and one that is she is forbidden to her paramour. Okay. Now, in the latter sections of the Mishnah, the Mishnah goes on and by association discusses other things which are not directly on the topic of the Sotah. So, although it is more correct to complete doing the Mishnah, we are now, for purposes of our class, going to go to the gemerah section that discusses this. Okay. So if we go down to that other section, which is the beginning part of that section, I think it was here. So that's 15.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, gemerah is going to do essentially a discussion to understand what we have said. Remembering that the Mishnah style is very brief, and we've had the advantage of the interpolation and the translation of the text to help us along, to give us an understanding. But the gemerah is going to go back to basics now, basically, and understand how do we understand things. Okay, so what the Mishnah has told us is that essentially there are two references to the water, and that the water will evaluate. The question is, who is it evaluating? One seems reasonably obvious. Right? It refers to the wife. She's the suspected adulteress. But there's a second mention of the water. So what's that second mention trying to understand? And what is Rabbi Akiva's comment, right? And the way he formatted in relationship to it. So first the gemerah asks, it said before, we said, Asa Laman, Asa, that particular reference, Laman, we said that it tests him, right? So going back to the top of the page, so that was 15, so we just have nowhere to go back to. The Mishnah said, Shahamayim boitkin Asa, the water tests her, Kachamayim boitkin Asa, so it tests him. Well, if we didn't have the interpolation helping us, right, we would be asking the question, who is him? Right? Who is the him? I don't know. I don't have a clarity. The gemerah is asking, make a clarity for me. Who is the Asa? Who is the him that you're referring to? Okay, so we'll go back to the gemerah text. went a little bit too far. Okay, so back to the Gemara. Esau, that reference to Esau, to him, Laman, which reference is it to it? Ilema Labal, if you're going to say that it refers to the husband, because that's our first inclination, that it should be testing the husband, right? And I have a suspicion, I can have a suspicion on the husband. I mean, if we're dubious about the wife, why wouldn't she be dubious about the husband, right? Then the question, but on the other hand, if we suspect on him, Labal, the husband, Ma'yobid. I mean, after all, what did he do? No one's put in a claim against the husband. So what's the issue? What's the issue with the husband then? So the Gemara is saying, Ma'yobid. What did the husband do that he should be evaluated by the water? Well, and then the Gemara then continues, and if you would say the E is B, and if you would say that he has done something, do we, for the E is B, that if we suspect that he has done something, ki is B oven, does he have some sort of sin bidet? Does he have some sort of water on? And if it would be testing her, do we have some sort of similar test that he might get tested and she would be automatically tested that way? Because mi botko lo mi didei, where do we find that he becomes, if he would be tested, is there some sort of circumstance where the waters test even the wife? And we've learned that part of the initial requirement, if he wants to start up the process of doing the Sotah proceedings on his wife, there's a preliminary stage. And the verse says, right, V'noka ish, the man himself has to be free of any ma'ovan, from any iniquity. And it's only if v'noka ish ma'ovan, it's only if the husband doesn't have any suspicions on him that he's done something wrong. Va'isha, then the va'isha he tisa savena, does the woman have to bear any iniquity? So that's only when, as he says over here, indicates that only when the man is clear of inequity does the water evaluate the fidelity of his wife. But if the man is not clear, if he is not free, so let's just read it. She will only bear the iniquity, only when the man is free from any sin, and the mayim boitken es the ishtay, and the water will only test the woman. Eina ish menuka ma'oven, only when he is free of anything. Eina mayim boitken es ishan, if he's not free of anything, it won't evaluate his wife. However, the Mishnah quite clearly said, that the waters will be testing him. So if we're in that circumstance of testing him, he must have been cleared, the husband must have been cleared of any iniquity, because he can't start the proceedings without him being clear of any issues as well. So therefore, what does the Mishnah mean when it says she is going to be tested and he is going to be tested? Well, so that in that case, there's only one other third party. There's only one other, a second party in this, right? There's the husband, and then there's a suspected adulterer as a second party. So therefore, who does it have to be? Ella Laboil. So therefore, it has to be that the Esau, the reference must be Laboil. It has to be to the alleged adulterer, the alleged paramour. And that he will be evaluated by the water at the same time that when she drinks. So when she gets evaluated, he will be in a spiritual fashion, in some sort of way, be tested in that same in the same sort of way by virtue of her being drinking the bitter waters. But if it is the adulterer, let the Mishnah use the specific wording in a different style. When remembering now that the Mishnah started off with the words, I would turn back to that spot, but I don't want to lose. It's just inconvenient to come back, right? So remembering the words of the Mishnah said, "Kishem shamayim beitkin Esau, kach mayim beitkin Esau." Just like it tests her, it tests him, right? But if we're trying to understand that it is the alleged paramour, why don't we phrase it specifically and say that? But we should say in it a different way. And how should we format it? We should format it how we've formatted the words two lines after that. The two lines after that said, "Kishem she'osa lebal, kach osa leboil." Just like she's not allowed to be with her husband. Remembering as we explained that third line was that if she's not willing to go through the processes, that she's in the status of a Sotah. So then we said that just like she's not allowed to be with her husband, she's not allowed to be with the paramour, even if she accepts the divorce proceedings, right? So that's that third line format. So why is our first words written in such an implicit fashion and not explicit like that third line? Since that's what it wants to tell us, why isn't it written in that fashion? Just as this is forbidden to a husband, so it's forbidden to a paramour. Just as there the paramour is mentioned explicitly, so too here the Mishnah should have stated, just as the water evaluates whether she is unfaithful, so too it evaluates whether the parah committed integrity. Why is not written in that fashion? So then the gemerah continues and says, in actuality, that's a good question. Why isn't it written in that format? But don't think that the idea is anything different from what we've said in terms of the rulings. La'elam, the Mishnah, the Gemara continues, La'elam, La'elam always, or this says, in fact, La'elam, the Mishnah is really referring Laboil to that paramour, to the adulterer. So, well, if that's the case, why didn't it write it explicitly? So the Gemara then continues and says, we want to keep the stylistic style consistent. So if I want to keep stylistic style consistent, why didn't I form it as the third line? But that's not exactly what happened. When I started off the words of the Mishnah, I used one word. I said Esau, I said her. So Reisha, the beginning of the Mishnah, was formatted as mentioning her. Reisha Ida Datona Esau, because the beginning mentioned the word her, it would have been stylistically inconsistent to put a full sentence and say the husband and the wife, right? So Tana Esa Sefer, so also it used as the second part in the same style. I did a Tana Baal, Tana Baal. So La'olam Laboil, but Reisha, the I did the Tana, once it was teaching Esau, Tani Esau, it also mentioned him, right? In that fashion. But the second part of the Mishnah, Sefer, I did a Tana Baal, Tana Boil. But once the second part had already mentioned the husband, it then could also explicitly mention the Boil. So let's go back and now look at that. Now look at the Mishnah's wording. So the wording was Kashem Shamayim Beitkin Esau, Kach Mayim Beitkin Esau, right? Just like the waters tested her, tested him, right? Then we said later, a little bit while down here, it says Laboil Alacha Laboil. So these words, Kishem she'osra labal, kach osra laboil, since we've mentioned the word husband, it fits to say, or it's appropriate to say laboil. So that's the same type of wording, husband and the adulterer. So although we could have said Kishem Shahamayim Beitkin Esau, just like the waters tested her, the waters tested him, right? But because we've used the word Esau, it's more stylistic consistent to use the word Esau, meaning him.
It's using the pronouns in both cases. In the first case, and it's using the noun in the second one.
But because we've first used that style, so we use that style.
Yeah.
At the next part, although we mean the laboil to the suspected adulterer, but that's not the stylistic style. And remembering that it was very important to keep stylistic styles consistent. So therefore, a so was used. In this case, it wouldn't have been possible to use, in the second part, it wouldn't have been possible to say, just like I made him osir, I also made him osir, right? So here we're explicit. We use the nouns. Geshem she osir laboil, just like she's osir to the husband. So also she's osir to the laboil, to the adulterer. So the Mishna said and proved, Rabbi Akiva proved that the idea that him and her were being evaluated by the understanding, Shenema, it says, as we said, uba'u. It said the water come in verse 24, and the waters come in the verse 27, and we understand that the second ba'u refers to the paramour. So our question is asking, we're now going to ask a question. We ask the following question. What exactly are we comparing things to? What is the repetition that do we have over here? Are we talking about the repetition of the word ba'u and the other word which we find in Numbers 27, uba'u? There's a vav there. There's an extra letter there. Are we doing something with the word ba'u of ba'u, or are we doing something with ba'u and the word and ba'u, and it came? Mm-hmm. So it could be that the Mishnah is telling us that I'm learning something from the word ba'u and the extra vav, which is in the second pasuk, and it's the extra vav, the extra letter, which is teaching me something. Or is it that the gemerah continues, or because the same spelling, and it shall enter are written twice in the verses? Is it because there's just the two exact same letters that are being repeated? Is that what we're learning from? And there is an implied differential because of that. In other words, to say, there might be more than one fact that I can understand it from. But before we go down that track, right, the Gemara is asking, are we comparing two exact words, or are we comparing this word, the same word, as well as the co-joining letter vav? So we continue when we say, Toshima, understand the answer to this question by looking a little bit further. The words a little bit further are Kishem she'osru labal, kach osru laboil. When Rabbi Akiva also taught us that just like she's osur if she refused to go on with the status of Sotah, doesn't want to be tested, then we said the words that just like she's osur to the husband, she's also to the paramour. And the proof for that was nitmo v'nitmo. So if I have a stylistic equivalence, this second proof on the topic of the who she is also to, which relates to the husband and the paramour, the proof was from two words, also superfluity in the verse, but the format is the word nitmo and the word and the nitmo.
Yeah.
So the style is the word plus the vav and the word in the other pasuk. That teaches me that Rabbi Akiva's first proof was of a similar format. So therefore, the proof is being brought from the format of ba'u and v'ba'u. But then the Gemara says, well, okay, that's a good understanding of Rabbi Akiva, but now prove to me that when we said v'nitmo, actually there's an intent to include the vav. V'adayim tibo nitmo v'nitmo ka'ama or nitmo v'nitmo ka'ama. Are we really saying that the verse to where we see the superfluity in that other verse of verses 14 and 29, are we using the nitmo and nitmo, or are we using the style of nitmo and a v'nitmo? Maybe it's the same sort of type of style. So in order to understand that, we go one step further and we bring another portion of some learning, and we see that by reading over this next section, we'll come to understanding of what the original section was about and which words were used as this proof. So Toshima, come and hear a proof from the fact that the Mishna teaches in the latter clause, when we mention Rebbe, in the second section when Rebbe was mentioned, Rebbe says that the Shnei Pa'omim Ha'omrim B'Parsha, that there's these two mentions of becoming Toma in the Parsha, and the quote was, V'nitma, v'nitma. Two times the same spelling, with both of the times the Vav has been included. His full teaching was, as this is what we quoted in the Mishnah before, right? V'nitma, v'nitma, echad l'baal, v'echad l'bayil, right? That's the quote that's in the Mishnah. But since we see that Rebbe has used the same two words, but has quoted them as v'nitma and v'nitma, both including the vav, right? It must mean that and he's saying the same rule. So we need to differentiate between him and his opinion and Rabbi Akiva's opinion. And if we don't differentiate between him and his opinion, Rabbi Akiva's opinion, then there's no point of bringing him. Rabbi Akiva's already said it. So he must be saying something different.
Right.
What's the different that he's saying? He's saying that the proof that we need to learn it from, the source text, is the usage of v'nitma with the extra vav and the v'nitma the second time around, right? And that's how we learn the conception idea that the husband is also to her and the paramour is also to her. But it also means that he's differentiating himself from Rabbi Akiva's version. So it must mean that Rabbi Akiva's version is different. Now that Rabbi Akiva's version is different, it must mean that Rabbi Akiva is doing the ba'u or the nitma without a vav and the nitma with a vav, and similarly the ba'u would be in with a base, with the ba'u, the word ba'u, and then the word verba'u. So that's how they're differentiating themselves. And in fact, Rabbi Akiva is learning his rules because there is a superfluous vav.
Mhm.
So therefore it comes out that there is, according to Rabbi Akiva and according to Rebbe, some different instances of teachings to be learnt out. In fact, the word ba'u is mentioned 3 times in the passage of the Sotah discussion in the Chumash. It's written ba'u and with a vav, ba'u. So even though it's written 3 times, it means that there are, as we're just about to say, Hilkach le Rabbi Akiva shisa korik sivi. There are now 6 times that the verse mentions the water. Well, if you look, right, there's only 3. I just told you there's only 3.
Mm-hmm.
But what Rabbi Akiva has said, that there is in fact the expression uba'u, and then there's the expression with a vav. So there's ba'u, and then there's the expression as it is with the vav, and that's written 3 times over. So therefore there are 6 instances. Those 6 instances will teach us teachings, right? And what will they teach us? We're just about to say. The gemerah will then continue what it'll teaching, but it's going to teach us 6, or there's going to be 6 applicable usages to apply to, right? And Rebbe, who is differentiating himself, will say the word really to examine is including the vav already, so there'll only be 3 instances. Okay? So therefore, reading on with the gemerah, therefore, according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, since the phrase "and the water shall enter" is mentioned 3 times in the passage, and the prefix vav is written each time together, therefore, each time the ba'u is written, it's expounded as though the phrase was written twice, and therefore the phrase is treated as though it was written 6 times as follows. What are the 6 times? Well, there are the 3, but there's a double, but because it's the word plus the vav, there's something to understand. So what are the 3 instances? There is chad le so'edida. One is the general commandment of the concept of Sotah dida for her, v'chad letzo'o dida, and there's one for the general concept, the general commandment for him. Who's the him? Well, we worked out before, it can't be the husband, so it has to be the paramour. Okay, so there's one, so the ba'u and the added vav, one refers to her, one refers to him, that's the 2 instances. Then there's a repetition of the phrase, chad la'asiyo, one to teach the process which will be part of the process of how she's evaluated. Chad la'asiyo didei, and one mention of when the water enters refers to her, the chad la'asiyo didei, and in the process of what's going to happen, the extra vav, right, refers to him. And as we said, there's a 3rd mention, v'chad lididei, v'chad liyeda, and one is for the general understanding that she has to know what's going to happen to, because as part of the process, the kohen who's organizing the process explains to her what's happening, what's going to be the punishment, what is the blessing, etc., etc., all the different processes which will happen. So one is for her knowledge, one is for his knowledge that he will be know. However, Rabbi, the other opinion in the Mishnah, he's not learning that extra bob. He's saying that that extra bob is not extra. It's part of the word to be utilized. So why is there three? Rabbi Tuasakre, right? The Rabbi also has three verses. Ksiv chad l'tzor, one for the general commandment, chad l'asiyah, one for the action part of it, v'ach liyed, and one for the information part of it. But what about how to? But what about the idea that he is to be, the paramount will be punished at the same time as she is punished, or examined at the same time? He learns it out of something else, right? And from where does Rebbe Kashem Shamain Beitkin Isa Kaf Beitin also Manolon? How does Rebbe know that just like she is tested, he is tested? Well, he says, well, that's not from that specific verse, but that's from something else. That's got to do in the processes for Nafkale Medatoni. He learns it out from a different area, from a different area of the Chumash. The different area of the Chumash telling us about how she's going to be affected, and then there's a difference of expression, and from that difference of expression, he will we know it. So the gemerah will continue, and then gemerah continues by saying, well, if Rebbe knew it from that different place about some other verses, what does Rabbi Akiva infer from these other verses? And the gemerah continues on the topic, right? So at this point, even though it's exciting as it goes on, right, we'll come back to it, but the gemerah topic continues for a certain period of time. So I hope you enjoyed it, and we learned this piece of gemerah. What we've learned, obviously we've learned of the concepts of the Sotah, but we also learned and we saw the precision that's in the gemerah, and how the precision of the wording of the Mishnah. We've seen precision of the wordings in the Talmud, and we see how they've been examining the text to get a higher level of precision out of the text, to understand the different concepts that are involved in the Sotah.
Yeah, this is a fascinating type of analysis. The way in which either the essential or superfluous vav is analyzed, and the issue of stylistic consistency, and doing an exegesis based on stylistic consistency from one phrase to another. It's amazing how much is gleaned from that perspective, from that approach.
Absolutely.
But this is very new to me. This is fascinating.
Yeah. So we base this on the ideas, as we say, that everything in the Torah is exact, is God-given knowledge, and we are given the tools to understand how we are to derive God's wisdom and teachings from the exactness of the text. In the same way, the Mishnah and the gemerah is also exact, and as we saw in the Mishnah, they were very precise in the way they worded things, and from that precision we can also derive learnings and teachings.
Yeah.
Okay, so I hope you, as you said, I hope you enjoyed it, and
thank you. Yes, indeed. Thank you.
We'll continue at our next opportunity.
That's great. That's great. I look forward to it. Thank you, Rabbi.
As part of the understanding of the style of the Mishnah, we have to understand that the Mishnah is written in a very concise fashion, and that concise fashion has the wording of it is very is not just concise meaning that it's a summarized text, but it's concise in that it's very precise, and in the precision there is understandings to be gleaned from the precision why specific wordings and stylistic wordings were done. So and there's also, so that's one thing to understand about. The second thing is to understand that the style of the Mishnah was, everything was remembering that this is the oral Torah. So this, and initially though it was prohibited to be written down. So so in that prohibition of being written down, everything had to be memorized. If everything had to be memorized, there had to be embedded stylistic components that help the memorization of it.
Yeah.
So it's like we just saw in the Mishnah, the word Esau and Esau, right?
Yeah.
Him and her,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In some respects, it's easier to remember and it fits in. And same thing with the second sentence of Labal, Label, right? So so it makes it easier to remember. In the same way, there is teaching why it was done specifically that way, and it is understood to be done that way because that there's a necessity to infer something from it. So it is, we have by tradition that we need to understand that within the Mishnah is many understandings implicit, and that implicit information was known at the time when it was taught. There came latter times when that precision in the Mishnah might not have been fully understood, and therefore the Talmud spent time to deduce what was part of the oral history and the oral laws that was embedded in that precision of those words and in the styles of the words in that way.
Yeah.
So that is part of what the gemerah what the Talmud is teasing out from the precision that's in the Mishnah in Mishnaic words.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right.